I'd like to introduce Alex Narayan, and he will take it from there. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. And it's nice to come along to an event like this and be thanked for being here. That's really good. What a great start to the day. So yeah, thank you for listening to me to begin with. I'm not going to carry on for too long. I've been given a 5-minute maximum period of time to speak, and Mark will kill me if I go over that timeline. Timelines, project programs, so I'm sure we're all used to those sorts of words. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the Institute, and I want to talk a little bit about today and why I'm so excited about it. The very fact that we've got so many people in this room from so many different organisations is a great thing. The reason I say that is because I'm very much behind the word collaboration. And for collaboration to occur and for it to become reality, it's all about building relationships. You only collaborate with people and with organisations you have a relationship with, and a relationship takes trust. It takes a step of faith. It takes a bit of an outreaching sort of attitude, and it means that we can grow our opportunities. If we take this and we capture this and we actually go away from here today with that one thought in mind, I've done my job. I've started to enlighten and envision individuals around this room to think beyond the work that they do. Now, I hope today brings forth lots of knowledge and understanding, and we all learn something from this that we can take away for the greater good of the built environment and the work that we do and the environments that we work in. So I'm just going to mention a few names of organisations that I know are represented here today, just from a few brief discussions I had with a couple of people beforehand. So we've got the CIOB represented here, the RICS, we've got CABE, the RIBA is represented, and they're all good organisations that we work alongside and want to work alongside and continue to grow with during the next few years and into the future. If we do collaborate and we do properly capture this once and for all, rather than keep talking about it, we will actually find our business opportunities will increase and widen. Because where you have gaps in your business and you plug them with collaborative business partners, you can widen your opportunities and secure larger projects than you might be able to do if you're working for a small or medium-sized practice. It's very, very simple. It doesn't take a lot of rocket science. It just takes a bit of courage, understanding, and the willingness to do it. My vision for our institute, CIAT, is that the Institute will become an exemplar of how Institute should be, that will reach out, that will lead and set trends in the industry in the field of architectural technology. I'm a chartered architectural technologist. I make no apology for that. I'm so proud of being that, and I understand the role that we play in the built environment along with other partner professionals. I want our members to continue to expand on being represented at all levels, right the way through industry and in general public domain. I want us to be the ambassadors for architectural technology and for the built environment, for the good of society first and foremost, and therefore by doing that we will also generate business. The discipline, I want our discipline, architectural technology, to be automatically understood and to consider to be a necessity for any new construction project. Over the last couple of months I've been spending some time meeting with various specialist recruiters, companies, and just meeting people on the other side of the fence, so to speak, from the work that I've been doing, which was in private practice for a number of years. And it's really interesting to see just how valuable architectural technology is to our industry, both on an architectural front, but also on a contracting front as well, and how I'm seeing more opportunities arising now of architectural technologists, chartered technologists, working not just in the traditional sense with architectural practice, but with contractors and in all walks of different areas. So that's providing design services for contractors, for design and build, for contractor design portions, and all those sorts of things that we deal with day in, day out. We often just take for granted. I find that really exciting that diversification is happening, and there's a huge demand there. I've also learned over the last few months that there's an undersupply of architectural technologists, and there is actually an oversupply of architects in the market at the moment. So that's great for our discipline. There's challenges for architects in that respect in the future. And I hope by partnering with the RIBA and with other partner organisations, we can help with that. We can help one another, and we can find avenues for both professions to continue to thrive into the future. I want every member of our institute to be empowered and proud of their profession, so they need to understand their identity, understand what they stand for, not compare themselves to others, but understand that what we have to offer is hugely needed in industry and will continue to grow in that need as time goes on. The more technology that goes into architecture and the built environment, the greater the need for architectural technology. Again, it's very self-evident that's going to be the case, and I'm very excited about that future. Anyway, that's enough about that vision. Hopefully you'll start to see that get delivered over the next few years, and there'll be measurables against that. And we're all working very hard in focusing on our identity, our presence and our growth across those three platforms. One relies upon the other, and we will see growth, and we will see this profession continue to grow and collaborate with others and make everyone's life a little bit easier, hopefully, and be the profession to be wanted to be partnered with. So I'm hoping that we'll form greater collaborations with other organisations. Been speaking with my dear friend yesterday evening, David Taylor from CABE, who's just taken up his presidency there. I'm hoping that we can do more work together, and we'll be working towards that. Similarly with the RICS and CIOB, love to do more with you, really. Reaching out the hand, I hope you'll grab that and you'll partner with us. Okay, now I just want to introduce Ian Pratt, who's going to be the first plenary speaker, if I've got the term right. He's director of Scott Brownrigg, and he is going to talk about the Spark building at Solent University, where I studied. Unfortunately, the Spark building wasn't there when I studied. I wish it had been. I was stuck in the 60s building stock, but there you go. That's life. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Got you. Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and good morning, everybody. I'm actually thrilled to be back in Yorkshire. It's great to be back in Leeds, where I began my architectural career. Lovely to see some familiar faces in the audience, people I worked with many years ago. And it's also great to be back at Leeds Beckett University. I qualified with my Part 3 from what was then Leeds Metropolitan University, so it's always nice to come back to where you started from. As was mentioned, I'm a director of Scott Brownrigg. I've been with the practice about 10 years. I'm here today to talk about this building, the Spark in Southampton for Solent University. Before I do that, though, I'll just give you a little bit of an overview of Scott Brownrigg, what we're all about as an organisation. Hopefully that'll then help to set this particular project in context. And you'll be pleased that there are lots and lots of images in this presentation, so hopefully lots to spark your interest, quite literally. Time permitting, I'd be happy to answer a few questions at the end, but if not, I'm here for the whole day. I'll be listening to the other speakers around at lunchtime, so if you do have any questions that I'm not able to answer at the end of the presentation, please just do come and have a conversation. So Scott Brownrigg, a large architectural practice, head office in Covent Garden in central London. These days we're about 250 in terms of staff numbers. Annual turnover has ranged typically between about 25 and 30 million. We're very active in most sectors of the construction industry, most building typologies. That's with sort of one notable exception, and that's acute healthcare. But having said that, that's an area we're starting to look at a little more closely. As well as the core service of architecture, we also have an interior design team. We offer town planning services, a whole range of complementary services. What's been very exciting over the last 5 years particularly is that we've begun an expansion into overseas areas, and you see here on this diagram our two major regional and fairly new hubs, those being New York and the Singapore office, and there's a really nice Singaporean connection with the Spark project, which I'll talk a little bit more as we proceed. We're doing quite well in terms of the rankings. Obviously they're just measures of how people look at how we're all doing competitively, but we're very pleased to be considered the top 20 architectural practice in the UK. Just a few examples of recent projects, really just to demonstrate the breadth of experience that we're talking about. And one of the reasons I think that's important is because our experience in the commercial and residential sectors has influenced what we've done with the Spark project and many others as well. So here you're seeing the Military Medical Museum in Cardiff. You may have seen a little bit about that in the press. It received some direct government funding. And this is the new headquarters building for the chip manufacturer and designer arm in Cambridge. Moving on to the next slide, another flagship project for us, University of Reading, Malaysia, in the top centre. BP's new Building E at their campus in Sunbury, top right. But they're much smaller scale projects, much more focused. Here you're seeing the woods in Woburn there. Because of our size, obviously we're able to tackle really large projects, and what you see there on the left-hand side is what's currently the world's largest terminal building at an airport under construction. That's Istanbul National Airport, and we were able to be involved in that because we acquired another practice known as GMW 2 years ago, and they're now an integrated part of Scott Brownrigg. Bottom left there, an FE college, and I'm very interested in some of the talks today because they're also about retrofits. That actually was a disused courtyard space prior to the team getting involved, complete with a stagnant fish pond and leaves blowing around in there. Chatting to Alex before the presentation, one thing that I've found really stimulating about my business is that we're always moving forwards, we're always looking to change, and of course we live in times of great uncertainty and huge change, and not least of all anticipating what might be happening as we leave the European Union. And that again is one reason why we're very interested in work overseas, and I think the word that Alex used there about collaboration is a really key word at the moment, and that can be collaborating with other businesses, other professionals, also seeking out the world's best clients. So these are 3 really new initiatives for Scott Brownrigg, and I'll just focus on the 2 to the right hand side. Design Technical Unit, that's a specialist visualization 3D prototyping unit, but it could actually run into all sorts of things in the future, and in a way it's a ring-fenced company within the Scott Brownrigg group. Design Strategies is literally very hot off the press, and that's all about workplace strategy. And what we're doing with our colleagues in IT within the business is actually looking at new applications, web-based tools that can help us engage with stakeholders. And I'm quite excited about this because I can see a real relevance for this in the academic workspace market moving forward. So I'd say look out for this as we go into the next years ahead. I'm just one member of the big team that I've been talking about, and we're really pleased about what we do in terms of giving back to the communities in which we work. And at Southampton Solent, we were able to offer work placements to students studying the architectural technology degree course down at the university there. And I think we had 4 or 5 through the office who we were able to literally involve in the design and crafting of that building, and particularly key details. We're also very pleased with our relationship with the Stephen Lawrence Trust, and again, you know, not only are we providing experience, we're also raising funds for them, and we feel really privileged that some of those young students have been able to join the business. So that's the overview of Scott Brownrigg. Hopefully that puts this into context. This is the Scott Brownrigg team who were involved in the Spark building. I'm just one very lucky member of that team here today representing all these people. I would say the key individuals are all on the top row, as you might well imagine. And Rob Houston there, our senior technician, is and was an absolute superstar in relation to this particular project. Now, unfortunately, he's not a member of CIAT, so I'm putting lots of pressure on him to engage with you as an organisation and to become a member, because I see immense value in institutions representing our various professions. Also, you have here members of the Singaporean team, and they particularly were involved in the final shaping and crafting of the pod itself. Of course, we were only one small part of a much bigger team, and it's great to see here today Interserve represented. They became the principal contractor for the project, which was procured through a design and build contract at the end of what was then stage E. But you see also the other disciplines ranging from fire consultants, structural engineers, M&E by WSP, Hand Tucker on the acoustic side, Broadstock on FF&E. I'll let you absorb that in your own time. So this was the original project brief. So for those of you who've managed to read the little piece in the press material about this particular project will have seen that in essence we secured the project through open competition through an ODU process. So a PQQ process that resulted in us being shortlisted from 120 practices to something like 5 who were then interviewed. This was the brief as it stood at that time, with the catchy working title of New Academic Teaching Building. Obviously, more recently that's become the Spark. But interestingly, if you look at the top line, what they originally were thinking about was a sports centre integrated with a teaching building. Now, anybody who's vaguely familiar with the project will know that's not what we did. Actually, what we've done is deliver a teaching building with conference facilities and all manner of other bolt-ons. But we very quickly realised in trying to interrogate and interpret that initial brief that actually what this project definitely wasn't just about was boxes, spaces, functional relationships. What it was really about was achieving massive transformational change at the university. Solent for many years, it's a new university, so only 10 years old as of last year, and they found themselves towards the lower end of the university league tables, the lower end of the student rankings, and they realised that to remain relevant in today's society, to secure students in an increasingly competitive market, they needed to stand out from the crowd and do something really different, and that very much set the tone for the whole project. So, having said it wasn't all about just about the functional side of the building, well, what was it about? Well, to find that out, we need to engage with the most senior post holders and a whole cross-section of the university community. Find out where the university was going, what was the business need for this building, how might they use it, how might this enable them to engage with employers, the local region, the city, everything that universities need to do in this day and age. What was great is the university themselves were trying to work all that out in parallel with us designing the building with them and building the brief. So what you see here is literally a cartoon just describing the 6 or 7 key strategic priorities for the university, which they've now adopted and some of which helped inform the brief and the design for the project. I talked about the cross-section of the university community. Well, this flowchart or hierarchy diagram, if you like, summarises the many people over the course of the project that we engaged with, talked about the project, refined the design ideas with, tested the brief. And that involved lots and lots of presentations over a project life that spanned about 4 years from concept stage through to completion on site at the end of May last year. So literally as I stand here before you, we are about to start doing the 12-month defects reviews on site. In terms of how we engage with the stakeholders, because there was a massive focus on academic accommodation, so teaching and learning spaces, the single most important user group, if you like, was the actual academics themselves. And what you see here are photos of some of the engagement sessions, but also how we illustrated functional relationships on the bottom left hand of the slide there, and also stimulated the conversation about what might the future of teaching and learning at Southampton Solent University be like, and looking at different modes of teaching and learning that the spaces would need to be able to deliver. I'm assuming most people have either been to the South Coast, know roughly where Southampton is. If you haven't, the red dot marks the spot, so just off the Isle of Wight on the South Coast, pretty much in the middle of the coastline. It's a fairly large city, a big port town. If you're going on a worldwide cruise or certainly a European cruise, you may well start your journey in Southampton. Certainly a while ago it was pegged as third fastest growing city in the UK. It's a city where the council have a vision which was really helpful to this particular project. And in fact, the Spark was one of the 7 VIP projects in the city master plan, which was much publicised and really driven forwards by the city and the city planners. The city centre you'll see in the next slide is very pleasant, and many people probably haven't heard of Solent University. You're probably more likely to have heard of Southampton University, the big research university that's much older. But it has to be said that, as you'll see in this slide, that Solent really has the stronger direct geographic presence with the city centre. So here in the centre of the slide you can see the university's island site, grade 2 listed 5-hectare central parks, and then here all of the civic offices and the civic functions, and a great external assembly space here. This is the legal quarter with the Jury's Inn Hotel just to the north of the site. Anybody who's a football fan, St Mary's Stadium. This is Port Solent in essence, so heading out to the south coast, and this is the Itchen River. So great central site, mainline railway station, which it has an excellent service up to London, further on to the south as well, is just located down here. So great public transport connections to the university site as well. Lots and lots of site analysis, as you can imagine, thinking from everything from prevailing winds, surrounding building heights, urban grain. These are just some things to summarise that. But focusing in on some of the planning issues, if you like, and what the city's expectations were for the project, what we wanted to deliver as well, The island nature of the site itself was, to a degree, a little bit problematic. We needed to deliver something that really addressed all of the primary frontages. And the civic authorities were really keen that the building had a very, very strong relationship with the central parks. And interestingly, the routes across the parks are the routes that, by and large, the staff and students take daily to access the building. Importantly, the university also leases accommodation in what was a former department store here. So there's a great cross-flow of people across that central park. In terms of former use of the site had been vacant for many years. There was an existing planning permission for a 20-storey tower at the very pinnacle of the site. But come the credit crash of 2008-2009, that developer went to the wall. The site came back on the market, and the university very shrewdly acquired it for a very good value, I would say, a very good price. And so this was their existing campus, and the Spark ultimately rebuilt this portion here, preserving as much land as possible for the university to develop in the future in whatever way it sees as being best. And that could be some kind of joint venture, some kind of enterprise centre. These are the existing buildings. Alex spoke about the 1960s buildings. Well, this was the Sir John Everett Millay building, constructed in the 60s. Some issues with asbestos, as you would expect of a building of that age. Coal bridging being a problem with part of the structure exposed. Not particularly inspiring, but as you can see here, a very dominant position at the northern edge of the campus, and we felt, well, here was a real opportunity to do something very, very different. Looking at that building in a little bit closer detail, if you look in the foreground here, you can see a concrete retaining structure. Behind that was the main vehicle access ramp to the whole of the campus. So we looked very closely at this and thought, well, here is a major challenge. What are we going to do? Are we going to put the building further north of that and just leave that where it is and accept it, or are we going to do something really big, a really bold move? And that's ultimately what we decided to do, was move that access road to really unlock future development and clear the site for the Spark. Just looking at that from another direction there, so this is the view from the west to the east, so the central park's here, that's the retaining wall I was just describing. We also had here the main central plant room serving this whole building, and just in the foreground, you can't see it here, but the main geothermal main serving the whole of the city of Southampton. So in being bold, we did give ourselves some really, really significant problems, or should I say challenges, to overcome. But what we saw, our vision, was that we could remove these concrete triangular roof lights, insert a concrete structure here, and by building new accommodation on the left-hand side there, create a fantastic new atrium space. And then cutting the cross-section down the length of that, we started to foresee exciting pod-like objects for this space. And the reason for thinking about those pod-like objects was to think about doing something really different, something very distinctive, something to put Solent University on the map, an attention-grabbing, inspiring sculptural object. So the brief had begun as a teaching building. As soon as we started talking about these sorts of things, the university said, well, hang on a minute, we're thinking about refitting our conference accommodation over the park. But actually, do you know what? If you're creating this new heart space, we can see great value for that. We have nowhere to host graduations. We can't host fashion shows as we would like to. We can't hold CIAT events, all of these sorts of things. So how about incorporating a conference centre into the brief? So end of stage D, that's exactly what we did. So we were really pleased that the design at that stage had enough flexibility that we could accommodate such a major change of brief. Also at the late stage, the university decided that they would like to refit the ground floor of the existing JM building. And that was great because one big idea here was to make sure we breathe new life into that existing building, which we saw as being something that would be very difficult for the university to replace over time. So here you're seeing an initial concept sketch. We gradually refined the number of pods down to 1. That was mainly for reasons of cost and buildability. And that's because we were using the spaces below this new atrium floor to create new lecture spaces. So retaining the existing concrete structures, making use of the level changes. So minimising heavy groundworks, minimising having to bring in fill or take materials off site. But in doing so, we needed to achieve clear spans. So you can see the challenges with pod legs and the like. Back to the site plan. So this is the area to the north that we were speaking about. We Did a lot of work with the university about phasing, and ultimately with the with Interserve as the contractor, thinking about where site accommodation might be, swings of tower cranes, all the challenges of working very, very close to an existing building in live operation, so that being the JM building here. But this is in essence where we shifted the new vehicle access to the whole campus too. So previously it ran pretty much along the line of this dotted green line. We moved it to the periphery, pushing vehicles away from the heart of the campus. And actually this is a 30-mile limit dual carriageway, so this worked really well. There's an ultimate aspiration, particularly from the council, for this to become a predominantly pedestrian route. So by moving vehicles, we were also helping the City Council in moving towards that objective. Looking at the, we called it the level 1 plan, which we selected level 1 as street level to tie in with the terminology used for the existing JM building. And you can see here what we've actually now delivered was a brand new cafe space, in addition to the fine dining conference area, which is supported by accommodation stacking up the building at the far eastern end. So an L shape forming this atrium space between. The roof lights that were removed, you can see just dashed here. That involved all sorts of complicated backpropping arrangements. So, you know, a lot of team working of challenges and problems. Engineers talking to the university about phasing, which academic staff members needed to move out. And in fact, at this level, we had TV studios, very acoustically sensitive spaces to deal with. Generally, the building plan repeats. So there are, in essence, within the building, 35 teaching classrooms, lecture rooms at the top level here, amphitheatre seating arrangement leading down to a Harvard style in the round lecture theatre to the west, and here a 200-seat traditional rate lecture theatre below as well. And at any one time, the building's designed to in effect seat 2,500 students, but the population of the university, as I think one of the earlier slides shows, is about 10,000. So almost every member of the student population makes use of the building on a daily basis. So you've got a lot of throughput of people, a lot of movement, and that was another reason for having this large central atrium space, was to cope with those flows of people. One thing that's not necessarily highlighted all that well on this slide is the interconnectivity between the new build accommodation and the JM building next door. We wanted to make sure there were lots of routes through at different floor levels to aid movement and really energise that building. You can see here an earlier version of the pod shaping. That was something that we refined over time. And actually there you see the two lecture theatres in cross section. We worked throughout with building information models, and that meant we were able to really experiment with some quite exciting things. This was the first printed model I'd experimented with and commissioned in my professional career. I only wish we'd made it slightly bigger. At that stage we were very limited by the printable bed size for the particular printer and the company we were using. So actually that model was about this big, which actually was a little bit too small to make it valuable for stakeholder engagement, but it did at least illustrate the cross-section very, very well. The whole of the professional team were also working with BIM, so we had, by the end of the project, something very, very close to a level 2 model. And it was in essence a federated model provided by, with individual models provided by different disciplines. At a point in time, the university became quite concerned about the flows of people, the widths of the open gallery walkways, particularly at this edge of the site here. How was it going to work with students queuing to transition from lecture to lecture? And so we suggested that we should commission some smart space analysis. So we employed Bureau Happold to look at the model and, using their smart space technology, do some agent-based modelling of key pressure points at key times of the day. So peak arrivals, peak departures, and the like. And the result of that is that we used the information and the recommendations they made to refine and tweak stair widths, gallery widths, door widths, things of that nature, even the placement of the staircases within the floor plan. This is very much how we like to work as a practice. So I'm sure we're not alone in this. I'm sure many of you work in this way. But we found this to be, really very helpful with the client team, particularly towards the end of stage E, or what I would now probably say stage 4, as a broad comparison, to actually be able to talk to the team and say, okay, well, this is the balustrade system we're proposing. It's going to be glass with a stainless steel handrail bracketed off with bolts and the like. This is what we're thinking for what was then proposed as an ETFE roof. These are the lecture theatre seats. So it was a great way of narrating the design to the client team and explaining to them what was going to be delivered, particularly by the contractor at the end of the project. Sustainability and quality, obviously two key themes for today. This cross-sectional drawing perspective illustrates some of the really key big moves we made towards making this a sustainable building, and more specifically towards achieving the BREEAM Excellent target rating. So just talking you through some of this, in terms of on-site renewables, we did explore linking into the geothermal city main. However, at that particular point in time, there were big concerns about how the heat was being pumped into that system. They were having to use gas-fired means to do that. There were also some capacity issues. So rather than connecting to that existing system, we decided to provide a large PV array at roof level. And of course, the university is fairly energy hungry, so this is energy they can use, but at night time and things, anything surplus can go back into the grid. One of the really big strategic moves was to make sure that most of the teaching spaces face north. So this is the north facade here. And what that did is help to reduce unhelpful solar gains, brought consistent, constant north light into each of the spaces, reducing lighting requirements. So what you see on the facade here are, broadly speaking, floor to ceiling double glazed units. For reasons relating to outside air quality and acoustics, the roads surrounding the site are fairly noisy. We're also very close to the flight path for Southampton City Airport, so what we couldn't have is noise disturbing the teaching sessions. So the building is actually a sealed building, or certainly the teaching spaces are. And we introduce air via active chilled beams, so the air is tempered with central plant, pushed along the corridor spaces in ductwork here, into the classrooms via the chilled beams. And the chilled beams incorporate the artificial lighting as well. Then we have a return air path into this atrium space. So the atrium is very critical to the whole climate control scenario. Hot air rises, utilising stack effect, and is then extracted at roof level via these grills and heat recovered with the centralised rooftop plant. Obviously, embracing this existing building helped massively with thermal performance there, but we did have to think carefully about how we introduce fresh air to the space. So the spaces within the existing building here have mechanical supply and extract. In terms of long-term relevance, so long-term sustainability, we embraced a flat slab technology, so basically got a 7.5 square metre grid for the classrooms, flat slab spanning between columns, 150mm shallow raised floor, so that's great for future distribution and existing distribution of power and data, upgrades over time, and exposing the thermal mass of the slab to even out the temperature swings throughout the day and help with the climate control scenario. Then generally speaking, lightweight stonework partitions throughout, so the building can be changed and adapted over time. Mentioned earlier, reuse of existing structures, and obviously that was particularly true in the ground or the lower ground levels here. So having developed that small 3D printed model, we then went on to more traditional means, commissioned a much larger 1:100 scale model here. There's a photo of that. But again, we were using 3D printing to generate distinctive elements such as the pod. And here you can see the functional nature of the pod. So it's actually, in functional terms, a lecture space for 50 to 80 people. With an exciting breakout space on the top, from which you can gaze out through the glazed curtain walling here, out across the city park and on towards the civic building. So a really strong visual connection with the city. So I spoke a little bit there about the functional side of the pod. And also at the start of the presentation, I guess and throughout I've alluded to doing something distinctive. And this is really what it's all about. And this is the spark, the university's logo, after which the building has now been named. And the idea for that very special object goes right back to the interview, where after a very successful question and answer session and presentation, the Vice Chancellor, and I was sitting in the middle, senior colleagues either side of me, and the Vice Chancellor looked at me and said, really enjoyed that presentation, but Ian, can you tell me what you think the university logo symbolises? And as prepared as the three of us were for this presentation, that just wasn't a question we'd really thought about or considered. By the way, I would suggest you do think about that whenever you're presenting to potential new clients. And so I did my best to kind of recall things I'd read in the brief, and if I'm honest, I waffled a little bit, as I'm doing now. So the Vice-Chancellor, with very good humour, and I should say he was also a Yorkshireman, so I think we had a bit of a rapport going there. So with good humour he said, let me just stop you there, Ian, and let me tell you what I think the logo means to the university. And these are some of the words that he used. So from that moment forwards, and we were very relieved that that whole dialogue hadn't gone against us, it had actually helped us, we held all of these things in our minds, and this is what we were thinking about when we started to sketch those initial forms for the pod itself. This was the first visualization we produced. This was very, very early on in the process. This was right at the start of stage C, and we did have to basically confess to the university we actually had no idea what the accommodation was going to look like to the left hand side of the image. So behind that perforated screen and series of projecting boxes, we just didn't know what the accommodation was going to look like. But this was the vision for the pod and this multi-purpose space, which had never formed part of the original brief. But as I mentioned, the university got incredibly excited about how they could use that for all sorts of different things. And here you see in some of the imagery the linking elements as well. There's a slight modification to this image in that originally we had an ETFE roof. I think I talked about that earlier. In the end, and gradually discussing that with the university, they became very concerned about rain noise, the drumming effect on ETF that can happen with ETFE in a large space like this. And there were also concerns about seagull attack. So apparently with ETFE, particularly if it's in smaller areas at roof level, in coastal towns, seagulls tend to attack the ETFE, or at the best, they drop stones onto it thinking it's water for some reason. So this is the psychological behaviour of the seagull, apparently. What's been great throughout the project is people have really engaged with this as an idea, and it's been likened to all sorts of different things, including one of my favourite childhood movies, Flight of the Navigator. Slightly more sinister things, War of the Worlds. Obviously, the pod actually has 4 legs, not 3, but I can see where people are coming from. Slightly less kinder analogies with barbecues and things, I think, but what I've always really enjoyed is it's meant something different to different people as they've seen it or engaged with it, both at design stage, during construction, and upon completion. I think I'd like to think it's something a little bit more nautical, and it was interesting that as we were developing the proposals for the pod, the university had researchers who were crafting new forms of sailing craft. I'm a sailor, so this quite interested me quite a lot. So high-end research and technology here. So again, I thought this was myself and the team thought this chimed really well with the shape we were proposing. And actually, there were people who would have liked it to have been literally a boat, almost with a keel coming down into the atrium, but we resisted that. So then a fairly major challenge presented itself, but a really big opportunity for me personally, and that was the opening and launch and expansion of our Singapore office. And I was approached by the board directors who said, Ian, we'd like you to consider going out there to help grow the team, recruit new team members. And the way we think this might work is if you take the construction detailing out there with you, and you and your colleagues produce that information, liaising with the Covent Garden office, who will represent the practice on site. So I should say at this point we had a dual role on the project. Once the contract was let to Interserve, we had the novated design role, so stage F onwards, but we also had a client-side monitoring role. So the agreement was with the university, and we did have to do a small sell on this, as you can appreciate, that we would deliver the novated service from the Singapore office in tandem with a representative in London, but the London team would be the due diligence monitors. So day one in Singapore, brand new team members in place, didn't even have computers in the office at that point. I'm describing the scheme, and my colleagues' eyes just lit up when they saw the red pod. And they said, oh, this looks just like a saga bean. And I'd never heard of a saga bean. But they're beautiful little seeds. They're really tiny. You can hold them between your thumb and forefinger. And they're incredibly stable, always the same size, and broadly speaking, always the same weight. So over time, they were used to weigh things like gold in the Middle East, and the tree itself has become endemic in Southeast Asia. Importantly in China, and most of my colleagues in Singapore were of Chinese descent, they're actually given as symbols of love. So again, here we were, different people seeing the pod, coming from another completely different background and culture, seeing some new meaning in it and getting excited about it for different reasons. And that really touched me, that whole sort of story and association. and that actually did influence the final shaping of the pod itself. So here, despite having worked with balsa models, taking sections from the BIM model, sticking them together, sanding the thing down, ultimately when we got to a shape we were happy with, we actually used a 3D nylon hot wire printing technology to build up this shape. And to remain connected with the client back in the university and my team in Covent Garden, what we actually did is we sent one of these back to Southampton along with a video showing the four of us in Singapore sketching the thing, building the physical models. And that was a great way of embracing multimedia to show how different people around the world were involved in the project. So having described the pod as a saga bean, something that's boat-like, open-top barbecue, alien spacecraft, really, as I've said, the really point I would like you all to take away with you is that it's an abstract object. It's not particularly representation of any one thing, and we tried really hard to make that the case. And it was great to be able to quote, obviously, the local artists and sculptors here, particularly Barbara Hepworth and the strong association with Wakefield, my hometown. Other challenges. So having designed this complicated 3D geometric form, we then had to propose a way of actually constructing it. And if I'm honest, at the early stages, we didn't really know how we were going to achieve that. For a long time, we thought we would be building it from GRP technology, but in the end, we just couldn't get companies of an appropriate scale interested in the project. So that was even me talking to the people who manufacture hulls for Sunseeker down in Poole and other big motor yachts. And then we met CIG, who I have to say were absolutely fantastic in the contribution they brought to the project. And if you ever have a really complicated geometric form and you can see an application for steel, then these are the people to talk to. They're based in Groningen in northern Holland, and originally they were a cooperative of steel plate makers for shipbuilding packages. And they came together as a cooperative because they realised that Holland was no longer competitive with places like Romania and more recently places like South Korea, where ships are being built on a massive scale. So they came together to say, let's source and make all of our steel plate together and then sell that to the surrounding shipbuilders. And in fact, they sell steel plate to the people who make the super yachts for people like Roman Abramovich. And the reason the steel plate is used is because it's so accurate, it requires very, very little fairing and finishing, so they don't have to apply lots and lots of filler. They can control the shape of the plate to such accuracy that it's super smooth when it's painted up. This is the works in Groningen. The canal ultimately led up to the North Sea previously, and what you see here is the cutting plant here. So they have laser cutters. I'll show you that in a moment. And then this is the bending plant, and obviously there you can see the steel plate. Probably important to highlight at this point that the steel plate for the pod actually was sourced from what was Tata Steel in Port Talbot. So it's actually British steel going over to Holland, being cut and shaped, and then brought back to the UK. Here we have some of the structural analysis drawings. CIG, what they've done over the years is invest massively in the software and cutting technology and bending technology to support the formation of things like this. They're involved in the Emirates Skyway cable car pylons that go across the Thames. Lord's Media Stand you may have seen, that was one of their very first UK projects. Headquarters for Porsche in Germany, and most recently the Crab Studio at Bournemouth University of the Arts as well. So they're really, niche specialists in what they do, and that in essence is why we had to go to an overseas company to be able to achieve this. There's nobody quite like them in the world with their capability. Integrated modelling, they were working with their own specialist systems, but here you see all of the various models overlap. So Scott White and Hookin's structural model, our architectural model, and CIG's fabrication model, and somewhere deep in there as well there's M&E as well. One of the big things we had to think about was how we actually assemble this project on site, the series of panels. What you see at the end here, this V structure was actually temporary support work to allow a large, or reasonably large mobile crane to be installed on top of the pod, on the concrete deck there, to hoist the various panels into position. Quick video here. I probably won't show you all of this in the interest of time, but it'll just give you a flavour of how CIG craft the steel plate. So this is the laser cutting plant. They're using large gantry cranes with magnets attached. That takes it onto the cutting beds. skip forward a little bit. And then you have operatives here with gantry crane controlled magnets, and they're lifting small pieces. So the curved pieces you see here are actual pieces of the pod that made their way into the final construction. So this is pieces that later went on to the bending plant, which you'll see shortly. This is the bending press, actually known as an English press, a fixed base, and the press head just literally is pressing down on targeted parts of the plate, moved underneath by this chain hoist, mostly controlled by a computer. But as you can see just on the floor here, and the chap is holding here, templates for checking the final shaping. And what he was doing there is actually lining those templates up with pre-printed, inkjet printed lines on the steel plate, which was put in place as part of the laser cutting process. From the bending plant, there are a series then of sections. You can just see here the welded lines which were brought together. So this was the benchmark sample that we requested as part of the detailed specification. So CIG working as a subcontractor to Interserve, I probably should have emphasised earlier. But the great thing is that you had a combination of very advanced manufacturing techniques coming together with real artisan craft skills. So lots and lots of welding, as you can see here, and then people grinding that finish, polishing that finish with manual handheld tools. Closer image there. And this was the client team. They don't look very excited in this particular image, but it have to be said, when this was wheeled out of the workshop on the flatbed, there was much excitement. I have to say, it took my breath away to see the quality of the finish on the steel here. But it was incredibly cold, and these chaps after an early morning flight were pretty cold and tired. But you can see the finish that CIG achieved was pretty close to that of car bodywork, which was very much part of our vision, a reflective finish that was going to reflect what was going on in the atrium space, show the trees moving in the park and the like. This is how the pods were ultimately assembled. The pod panels were ultimately assembled. So you can see the weld lines here on the back. Then they're brought together with back-to-back channels, bolted into place. Then each section is bolted to the next. This I hadn't expected to see. Nobody told me that they were going to assemble the whole thing in one enormous piece and then turn it over and then cut it by hand using angle grinders into individual pieces for painting and ultimately shipping to the site and assembly on the site. So when we received these photos, we were literally blown away. And I should say that this whole structure weighs about 62 tons. So turning something like this over is no mean feat, but boy are these guys good at what they do. So they'd rehearsed that, they tested it with models using their building information modelling. Literally used the two cranes to turn it over. The reason they chose to do this, and I would say, I would emphasise it was CIG that chose to weld it together like this, is they wanted complete uniformity of the finish transitioning from panel to panel, and that's exactly what they achieved through this process. These are some of the guys working on the handrail, the bent stainless steel handrail. And again, you see the kind of scale of the object here, the scale of the challenge, the ambition, just how bold this is. But great attention to detail. They fabricated all of these metal frames to suspend each pod panel to protect this red finish, so that these could all then be stacked in shipping containers and then brought to the site. We took the client on these visits as well, so they could see the way this was developing. They covered it in social media, used it as part of promotional material to get the academics at the university excited about the project. So this was June 2015, so a year ahead of completion. Again, just a closer view of the panels suspended in their shipping crates and frames. But as with all design and build projects, there was quite a lot more design work to do, completing the design intent. And one of the things that, if I'm honest, I wish I'd spent more time on at the start of the project and earlier work stage was actually the interior lining of the pod and how that was going to come together. So we had to do a lot of work in the latter stages of construction even, thinking about how we were going to use a perforated lining so we could deal with acoustics, create the reverberation control, but also for that to be sufficiently robust. There was much concern that students may, in this interior, be tempted to try and run up the prow of the pod internally. These panels might get damaged. So here we were in Heineken again with the client team, and I'd working with my team got CIG to make this sample, and this was Hans from the installation team. He's one of the heaviest people there on the day. So I said, Hans, would you mind just demonstrating how robust this perforated panel is? So again, I think you never underestimate the power of prototyping when you're dealing with something like this, and actually mock-ups, benchmark tests. And then these were hand-drawn sketches we were looking at, literally with CIG, working out, collaborating, how were we going to get the right result for the whole project and for the university. Talks a little bit about procurement. I won't dwell on this too much, but that really is just a summary of the contractual arrangements. So over here, members of the retained team. Glees were fulfilling the overall role of contract administrator and PM, F&G on the cost consultancy side, and of course Interserve as the main contractor, with the innovative consultants and additional consultants they brought on board sitting below as well. Very, very pleased that the project was showcased as part of a booklet looking at how people might approach the new CDM regs as they were launched in 2015. Paul Bussey used to work for Scott Browning, so he was very closely involved, fulfilling the role of CDMC originally, and then PD towards the principal designer towards the latter stages of the project. So the project actually transitioned the switch from the former regulations to the current ones. So some installation photos. This was the framework around which the pod panels are actually clad. You can see some temporary supporting struts there, and this was actually the crane that later had to be stripped. It was too heavy for the various hoists in the building, so I had to take the caterpillars off, the supporting leg structures, and then crane that into place and reassemble it, which was not something that people normally have to do with pieces of plant equipment. You can see the flat slabs here, cantilevered projecting bays, very simple repetitive structure, and you're just starting to see scaffold going up here to deal with window replacement and asbestos removal. Skipping forward a few months, I think this was. Intumescent painting to the pod, everything you see in white. Scaffolding for the dry lining to the new build accommodation, and the Interserve elected to build a birdcage scaffold here so they could deal with easier hoisting of the panels to the belly of the pod, if you like. On the fire front, probably worth mentioning that the whole approach revolved around BS 9999. So we had to commission computational fluid dynamics to test how smoke would behave in a fire and evacuation scenario. And it's a managed evacuation of the building with refuges at either end. Going forward, you can just see the crane on the top of the pod there. So for the underside of the pod, things were lifted into place and then connected, and you might just be able to make them out here, connected with bottle screws to the underside of the structure. And one person here I'd really like to single out, this is Sam Teremetz, who is the project director from Interserve based on the site. And I think one of the reasons this project was the success that I think it is his attention to detail and that of his team. And he was a great leader on site and somebody who really understood where we were coming from architecture and really embraced and was passionate about delivering the design as faithfully as possible. That's the temporary steelwork that I spoke about earlier. And just starting to close up. And of course, one of the challenges here was we actually had to provide a crawl space, if you like, for operatives to work on adjusting the bottle screws here to get the panels into alignment. And that basically meant we had to form some escape hatches in the floor so that they could get out at the end of the day. We didn't want to leave anybody permanently entombed in the pod. Onto the external facade, and I'm conscious we've got about 7 minutes left, I think. We looked at lots of different options, but what we were trying to achieve was something that related to the civic buildings, so responded to the Portland stone finishes of things like the Guildhall, had a very strong civic presence, anchored the university as being something here to stay for the future, something very enduring. What you're seeing outlined in red there was the design that we opted for, and then just a very simple diagram. We had to deal with some level changes, as I've mentioned, so to do that we brought in this device of what became the dark grey podium. Then with this ribbon of highly translucent reglit cladding panels around the edge at street level. Then a very repetitive design for the upper floors. Again, producing visuals, helping the client understand what we were going to deliver, and then remaining faithful to that image or a series of images all the way through the project. And I think we keep doing this now going forwards as a practice, because having a benchmark image from which everyone can go back to, I think really helps people to buy into what you're trying to deliver. It's great to have a conversation with the contractor and say, yeah, okay, really like what you're suggesting there. Let's now see how that relates to this vision. How can we get the final delivered product to look exactly like this? For the whole of the external facade, we, so should I say, Interserve Engaged Techcrete UK Limited, based near Scorby, North Lincolnshire, and they manufactured the external cladding panels, which were brought to site pre-glazed. And here you see those panels stacked up in the works. We went up to site along with Glees to do valuations, look at the quality of the works, but the quality of the product was absolutely exceptional. And the real benefit of this was that the whole of the facade system, and you can see one of the typical facade module there, nominally 3.6 by 7.2 meters, being installed by I think one of the largest mobile cranes in the UK at the time. There was something like 110 individual cladding modules, but it meant the whole of the external envelope was installed in a period of between 5 and 6 weeks. So very quick speed of installation, no need for scaffolding to the external facade. So all of the weather sealing between these panels, the silicon jointing, was all done from mobile platforms. So saved on the cost of prelims, great quality product. That cost that was saved ultimately could be spent on other things. Great for programme. I think one of the things that I thought was absolutely fabulous about this project was the fact that everybody in the whole team was thinking about all of the details. I've not previously been involved in a project where so many people of so many different disciplines were involved in creating something in the round. So here we were talking to branding specialists who were at the time looking at rebranding the whole university. Thankfully they didn't reinvent the logo, but what they were very keen on doing was expressing the different disciplines that the university has become famous for, and also the disciplines that they're progressing with going forward. So you'll see things that allude to architectural technology potentially here, as well as maritime innovations. You might not know, but things like the hovercraft, Christopher Cockrell invented the hovercraft in Southampton. They have a very successful media school as well, and they were very involved in publicising this project and capturing what we did. Southampton and R.J. Mitchell, the designer of the Spitfire, also synonymous with Southampton and based there. So the university have incorporated that as a graphic in lots of their marketing material, course provision. As well as branding, we were very heavily involved in the FF&E solutions, so the fixed and mobile furniture. And what this was all about was, again, going back to delivering what would the future of teaching and learning look like at Solent. So in addition to traditional square tables and chairs, we were looking at much more interesting cafe style furniture as well. Some collaborative learning suites, these became known as. These are all designed for 25 to 30 people. There were also some 50 to 60 person rooms as well, which were pretty much this double module. Some pictures of the end result here, and what the balconies are all about, in addition to that multipurpose learning space, is providing spaces for staff and students to mingle, meet, talk about coursework, talk about their interests, share knowledge about their disciplines, all on campus. What wasn't happening prior to designing and delivering this building is people dwelling within the campus. They were generally coming to a lecture and then disappearing elsewhere. What this is providing is that space for people of different disciplines to come together. So what makes the Spark unique, or what would I say makes it unique? Well, it's the synergy of all the different things I've been talking about, all coming together, I think, to make something really interesting and really relevant for particularly universities at this point in time and going forwards. I quite like this quote from Henry Ford, because I think it really sums up how designers of all disciplines can come together and give the clients more than they were expecting, add value. I think this is where we all add value. We don't just accept briefs as they're presented to us, we question them, we challenge them, and we encourage clients to think out the box and think differently. And the result of that is great buildings, great products that we all deliver. I'll skip through these things quite quickly, but how might we measure the success of this project? Well, it was very well received when presented in China. Thousands of students stood up in this enormous secondary school and applauded the professor who was presenting this, the moment he transitioned to the slide. I'd love to think it's about the design. I suspect it might be more to do with the colour red, which of course in China is very auspicious. But the same professor was a specialist in typography and graphic design. And at a very late stage in the project, he said, can we integrate some permanent artwork into the project? We said, well, we think we probably can. How about the glazed balustrading? So he designed a font especially for the project. And I'm told that the letter O's are supposed to evoke thoughts of the pod. And the angle of the Y's and the K's is reflective of the legs of the pod as well. And students were involved in selecting quotes, and there was a series of inspirational quotes around that atrium void. It was fabulous how well the various specialists and also the labour force working on the project engaged with that very special element. And we're really genuinely proud of it. These are the owners of the fabrication company IBIS, who were subcontractors to CIG, and they came over to the launch of the pod, as it was called, which happened ahead of the topping out of the building, and they shared a glass of fizz with us all. And I thought it was fabulous, given that he individually cut this all into pieces with an angle grinder. He was the one man working night and day doing that. And if you've ever used an angle grinder, you'll know how difficult that is to cut a straight line. The academics in the adjacent building were obviously living and breathing what was going on the site in the same way as the contractor and their operatives. And it was great that Peter Jarvis at the university captured the progress of the works in a series of wonderful sketches like this. And what we're hoping to do is have an exhibition in our offices in London and elsewhere to showcase his work. Surprisingly, but pleasingly, the university are amazed how closely the whole team managed to stick to the concept images in terms of the delivery of the key spaces and obviously the building as a whole. Here you see another interpretation of the Spark logo, so a very dynamic effect. And what you're seeing here is a mixture of absorbent and reflective panels to control acoustics. And then the Harvard Theatre in the round that I mentioned, and this has actually been one of the most successful spaces in the whole university. Quite a limited headroom, but that was because we were dealing with existing levels and wanting to minimise excavations. The reason that's successful is they had no other space like it where they could rehearse courtroom type presentations. It splits quite nicely into 3 distinct working groups and the like. Classrooms, these are the spaces we delivered, so shallow raised floors, exposed soffit, hanging acoustic baffles to control acoustics, and you can just see here the active chilled beams, red lit. Very, very bright, light spaces, clean and crisp. The colours we've selected there are all reflective of the university's secondary brand. Here's the final main space, and it was great that we had the opportunity to design the reception desk built out of a Corian-like material. And one of the things that's worked very, very well, and again was an architectural idea, was the introduction of this large flat panel TV screen. And that's great because the university can continuously showcase things that they're involved in, and there's even been the odd football match shown on there as well. So this is what we started with. So this was the existing roof of the building, that vehicle ramp. So the lecture it went here, and this part of the floor here, where you can just see that movement joint there, I hope, is literally the edge of that roof. So you can see what a transformation we made and what we did to the existing facade to overclad that and conceal lots and lots of ventilation ductwork. Looking back the other way, so this is from one of the level 3 conference rooms. So looking down onto the pod, you can just see there people standing on the top. Informal performance and seating area here. I didn't pick the plants, but I can see why they think that works. And this is in essence the crush space and the space that allows people to move between the 2 lecture theatres. Surprising things, pod launch day presented with pod cakes, and at the time I think we were in the midst of a bake-off final, so that seemed very relevant. And I'm not sure I'll ever have another design of mine and my team's immortalised in cake. They were very tasty, very fattening, but very tasty. And what's really interesting is at the time, running up to completion, if you typed into any search engine Southampton Solent University, this is how many times that image appeared on the first page. So interesting how much I think building designs, particularly things that stand out, can help to reinforce a brand or raise profile. So in this world of social media, this social media age, I think that's something quite interesting. The university are using the building in ways we couldn't really have imagined. So this was actually a video that their students produced where they showcased different courses by digitally mapping on video onto physical elements of the building. So this was the digital meeting the physical in a new and interesting way. This was the atrium dressed for a wedding, which, again, not foreseen at all. And the conference centre has been amazingly successful. In the first year, I think they had bookings every single weekend for one event or another. And one of the things that was great to see was the atrium being used in all these different formats. Here you have a fashion show format, and the university is very, very strong in the arts subjects. And so to see their students parading their work there was really fulfilling, and actually quite an emotional moment. This was a really quite long, arduous and challenging journey for everybody involved over that four-year period. Peter Jarvis here with the team of people sketching the building, and it's great in the evenings. Light spills out from the atrium in exactly the way we hoped. It attracts interest. People stop in the street, they're gazing in and wondering what that object's all about. Even Theo liked it, former Dragon's Den. He was invited to open the building. This was the launch here. And just some sort of staggering statistics. So I said 62 tonnes for the pod earlier. That was the shell structure, if you like. 67 by the time you factor in all of the supporting steel work. And 5,200 cubic metres of concrete, which seems low, but I'm told is the right answer. So a little bit of a summary of the process here. So far we've had lots of praise from academics. They seem to really like the building. It's really helping them to do what they would like to be doing in terms of teaching and learning, particularly engaging with students. And I will just finish off with a very short video that just gives you that whole overview of the building. This was produced by the university shortly after handover. Actually, what I should say at this point is we actually commissioned an animation as well. I didn't want to give you video overload this morning, but what we're hoping to do is now actually commission a video that literally maps the route that we took on the animation around the building, so that we can actually display the two side by side, and we will then be able to see, how very, very closely what was delivered by Insert and the team matches our design vision. I guess one thing I didn't mention was the overall value of the project. I suspect that might be a question that's in the back of your minds. Total project cost was around 33 million, so that's everything factored in, with a build cost of, final account still being worked on, I believe, by the various parties, but I think it'll be in the region of about £26 million by the time they're finished, which gives a square metre rate of roughly around 2,600 square metres. So I think the university did very well when they tendered this project, and all parties did very well in delivering it for that square metre rate. I've spoken about the Civic Centre. One of the defining features there is the clock tower at the Guildhall, with a very good connection across the park. That's it from me. Thank you very much. Do we have time for 2 or 3 questions, or would you rather move on and people grab me?
Well, is there any burning questions, first of all, that...
I've just got one. As speaking as a town planner, do you not think there was a missed opportunity with the rooftop? It's fairly bland, and you could put some iconic structure on top.
Could have done. We did actually think about a green roof at one stage, and that was something the planners were encouraging us to think about. The challenge with that was that we knew we needed to accommodate a large PV array, and also because of being in the flight path, we had to have a bird strike mitigation plan in place. So actually, the less, if you like, the less interest and the less going on the roof, the better. So most of the plant, I don't know if you saw from that image there, most of the plant is actually enclosed, and selected areas are actually netted off as well to minimise roosting. So that was one reason why we chose not to. I guess also thinking about things in the round, we wanted to focus on one very, very special object and have all of the attention focused on that. And so we were trying to strike a balance between that interesting reflective shape and then something very rectilinear with a greater sense of permanence, something a little bit more restrained. So that was on balance where we ended up. Yeah.
Right, I'm going to have to call a halt to it there. Ian's around for some of the rest of the day.
I'm here till about 4:30, and then sadly I've got to jump on a train back to
Fantastic,
London,
because
but,
nobody else is here after 4:30 either. So that's good news.
I would like to be in the pub with you, but
So, well,
next
yeah,
time.
yeah,
Next time.
okay. So if you've got any other questions, I'm sure Ian will be delighted to talk to you throughout the rest of the day. Lunchtime is a prime opportunity, perhaps. But if you'd now like to go and grab yourselves a very quick coffee, the next presentations will be starting in 5 minutes because we've overrun slightly on this.
Apologies
one,
for
I'm
that.
afraid. But no problem.
Can I just say, everybody, Nick Heath, if anybody's going for Nick Heath's lecture,
Thank you.
we are having that here.
No, we're not, John. No, it's